I've had some questions about the hardware that I use, and so far I have published a video on my workstation, a link to the workstation that I would be replacing it with if I needed a new workstation, the printer that I have, and a link to the printer that I would be replacing it with if I needed to replace that printer. All right, so today in this episode on my hardware reviews, we're going to go over the action cam that I purchased and I've been using for the past 6 years, and the action cam that I would be replacing this with if I needed to replace this action cam like tomorrow. So the action cam that I have is a Hawkeye Firefly 7S. Like I said, I purchased it 6 years ago. I paid less than $80 for this action cam. So I think that at the price that I paid for it, the features that it has, I think it was an exceptional value. Now the one that I would replace it with, and there will be a link in the show notes to it, it's the newest version of this. I think it's two. Let me see. Yeah, two revision. Let me think about that. I think it is the third. I think it's the third newest revision after they came out with this one. And it is the Hawkeye Firefly 8SE. And the reason that I would replace this one with that one is it looks like it has the same form factor. It has the same lens that I have with this one, but it has higher resolution chip in it, image processor, image chip. So it can actually record natively at 4K, and this one records natively at 1080p. So like I said, it's 6 years ago. So I've had it, and I've used it for a long time, and I use it extensively. I would say that I probably use it on average a couple times a week, and I probably record with it for about anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour each time that I go out. I always keep a spare set of 3 batteries. So when I purchased this, I purchased additional batteries for it so that whenever I'm out filming with it, I try not to film over 30 minutes. I know what the specifications say as far as how much recording time you get depending on the resolution and the frame rate that you're shooting at. But there's nothing more frustrating than having your camera shut down because the battery gave out in the middle of what you're trying to film. And I've had that happen a couple of times because I forgot to change the battery out. So I try never to record for more than 30 minutes at a time without putting a fresh battery in it. Then you know you're not going to have any problems. Batteries are like people. They have an optimal temperature range in which they operate efficiently. So, and I film in the wintertime and I film in the middle of the summertime. So if it's really hot out there, if it's really cold, the performance of the batteries is not going to be as good as they would be under optimal temperature conditions. So, yeah, remember that. So as long as I do that, I don't have any problems. As long as I change out a battery every 30 minutes, I don't have a problem with it. So, but I started recording with this camera at 1080p, which is the highest resolution this camera supports. It's what I shoot on all my videos at. 1080p at 60 frames per second. And so I decided I was going to use this camera for. I wanted to test it as a studio camera because I'm really not happy with the camera that I currently use, the one I'm filming with now for video. So I wanted to test this one out. It didn't work very well as a studio camera because these action cams have an infinity focus. Okay, you can't adjust the focus on the lens. And so as long as whatever your subject material is that you're filming is a certain distance away, it's going to be nice and clear and crisp. But if you get too close or if you get too far away, it's going to be a little out of focus. Now that sounds like a con on using one of these cameras, but it's actually a positive because it makes it extremely simple to use. You just have to remember where your subject, how far away from your subject material you need to be. And it's a pretty wide range. It's not like you've got to have it a specific number of feet away. It's just that you can't have it too close or too far away. But you have a huge range where everything is going to be in focus all the time, which makes it very easy and very simple to use these cameras. Now, what should you look for in an action cam? And this camera came, and the replacement camera that I have a link to in the show notes, comes with all kinds of mounts. It has a mount for a bicycle. It comes with a waterproof case. It comes with a standard mount that you could use on a tripod. Now this head mount that I have, and this is what I use when I go out and film, this fits over top of my head, and then it has an adjustable mount that comes with the camera that connects to this. And so you can get the right amount of tilt on it, you can get the right amount of angle on it. And so when I got it set up and got it positioned on my head the way it felt comfortable, and then basically I just played around with it and made sure that I had it positioned on my head the same way each time. And then once I got it, the angle and everything right where it needed to be so that my subject material was right in the center of the frame, I just took some white fingernail polish and I just made a line across the front of the mount where the two pivot points are, and across the bottom of the mount where the bottom pivot point is, and then I tightened everything down. And that way, visually, whenever I pull the camera out, I can immediately look at it and make sure that nothing has changed on the position of the camera in its mount. So there's a tip for you. But what to look for in an action cam. This is one of the few cameras that I found when I was researching action cameras that had a 90-degree field of view lens on it. And these are glass lenses, they're not plastic lenses. What I have discovered with using action cameras in the past, because I've used 3 or 4 different ones before I purchased this one, is that once you get to 120-degree or larger field of view, you get this fishbowl effect, where it kind of wraps the video image around the lens. And so when you're editing that film, edit with a lens that's 120-degree field of view or higher, you either need a filter in your video editing software that's going to correct that fisheye lens, that effect on the film, or you're going to have to crop it, one of the two. Now, the advantage of using a wide-angled lens is it's easier to get your subject material close to the center of the frame. Shouldn't have your subject material moving out of the frame with a larger field of view. But the downside to that is that, number one, you get the fishbowl effect, and number two, because the camera is pulling in more real estate in the same size frame, it makes everything look smaller and further away. Well, I wanted to get a camera that had an option for a field of view that, number one, wouldn't have any lens distortion in it, and this is a 90-degree field of view. It has no distortion in the image whatsoever, and so it wouldn't make the images look so far away. Now, the only disadvantage to that is you've got a smaller frame, because things are closer. So it makes it a little more difficult to keep your subject near the center of the frame. It just takes some practice. So once you practice with your camera, you won't have any problem doing that. So the things that I look for in an action camera is, number one, I want it to perform well in low light as well as brighter light. I want it to have a lens somewhere around 90 to 100-degree field of view so there's no distortion of the image, and so objects don't look so far away. You want whatever you're filming, you want it to look as close to the camera as possible. So, and this is one of the few cameras I found that had that. When they state a certain resolution, you want to make sure that that is a native resolution, that it's not a hardware scaling resolution. You don't want to buy a camera that's going to film at 4K. And when you look at the specifications, it's filming at 4K, but its native resolution, the highest native resolution is like 2.7K, and it's hardware scaling to 4K. So
I always look for whatever the native resolution is of the camera, and also what kind of frame rate it supports. Now this one supports 1080p, that's the highest resolution, at 60 frames per second. Now, the one that I would buy if I had to replace this one is the Firefly 8 SE, and it has 4K native resolution at 30 frames per second, I think at 1080p, and I'll have a link to that camera in the show notes. I think at 1080p it supports 120 frames per second. So that's something else to consider, is the frame rate at which you plan on filming and the resolution that you plan on filming, and make sure that the camera supports that natively. But there are two different links that I have to the 8SE in there. So if you're looking for an excellent action cam that is a very good value at where it's priced, then check out the 8SE. It has all the features that this one has that I've been using for the past 6 years, and it's fantastic with a higher resolution and a higher frame rate. Okay, so some of the things to consider when choosing an action cam is the field of view and what frame size, in other words, what resolution of video that you want to shoot in, and the frame rate that you're wanting to shoot in. Now, when I was testing this as a studio camera, I had always filmed my RC flights. I use this to film RC aircraft. That's my hobby. And I use this camera to film all of my RC flights. And I had always shot those videos at 60 frames per second, 1080p, 1920 by 1080, at 60 frames per second. Well, when I was testing it as a studio camera just to see whether it would work or not, I had set the frame rate at 30 frames per second rather than 60 frames per second because I was just shooting a video like this. Well, when I took it out the next time to film RC flight, I forgot to change it from 30 frames per second to 60 frames per second. And so when I got back, I didn't realize it until I imported the video into my video editor, and when it reported that it was 30 frames per second, I was like, oh no, I forgot to change the frame rate back to 60 frames per second. So I thought the video was going to look really bad, and really kind of jerky with the plane flying around everywhere. But what I found was that I really couldn't tell any difference in the smoothness of the plane flying through the air at 30 frames per second as opposed to 60 frames per second. And so I've kept it at 30 frames per second from that time forward. I mean, at 30 frames per second, it takes up less space on the SD card. It's half the number of frames to process that I would normally have to process, which means the file size of the video is half the size it was before at 60 frames per second, which also means that the file size that I have to upload to YouTube is half the size that I'd have to upload before. Of course, it's a smaller video, so YouTube is able to process it faster than they were in the past. So it really depends on how close you are to the action, how much action there is, as to what frame rate you're going to need. Now, and there's one thing that I could think of that you might want to do where you would need the higher the frame rate, the better. Now, I don't ordinarily export any of the video frames as a still image. I basically, take a still image and then use that. I don't normally take it from the camera. But if you are wanting to film some video and be able to use some of those frames as still images to export from the video, the higher the frame rate, the better. Because the higher the frame rate, the more likely you're going to be able to find the frame that you want that's clear and crisp with no blurring around the edges or anything from the action that you're shooting. So in that case, the higher the frame rate, the better. But as long as you set your frame rate, for what you're wanting to do with the video once you shoot it. It doesn't have to be a real high frame rate, like I said, unless you're wanting to export some of those individual frames from the video.
then I could see that you would want a really high frame rate. But other than that, for just moderate action in front of the camera with me with the RC aircraft flying in front of the camera, 30 frames per second has worked really, really well. I was surprised, but it did. I don't know if they still shoot movies in the same frame rate, but they used to shoot movies at 24 frames per second. So, and in action movies, there's a lot of quick movement going on, and even at 24 frames per second, I mean, it looks pretty good. So don't get hung up on the frame rate. As long as it shoots at 30 frames per second, I think it's going to look pretty good. Like I said, there'll be instances where you want to shoot at 60 frames per second or higher if you want to export the individual frames. But they also have, I mean, this camera also has a stabilization gyro built into the camera to take a lot of the jerkiness out of when you're moving the camera around, to smooth that out. So that's pretty neat. It's very easy to operate. When I go out to film with this, I've already got everything set up, through the menu. I've got it set for 1920 by 1080. I got it set for 30 frames per second. The only thing I have to do is put the SD card in it, a little micro SD card, and all I have to do is push the button on the front, which powers it on. And then when I'm ready to start filming, I just click the button on the top. And when I'm done filming, I just click the button on the top to stop recording. And then I press the button in the front to turn the power off. And that's it. I mean, it doesn't get any easier than that. And when you're going out to shoot video, you want the operation to be as quick and as easy as possible. And I don't know how you would make it any easier than that. So, for 6 years I've been using this. Haven't had a single problem with it. Now with the batteries, since I typically go out and film with this a couple times a week, I mean, that's 52 weeks a year, because I film all year round with it. What I found is if I go out and I shoot on a battery for 30 minutes, and then when I bring it back and when I charge up the batteries, when it takes about an hour to charge the battery back up after 30 minutes of filming, it's time to retire the battery and replace it. And so, like I said, when I bought this camera, I bought 4 battery packs. So after every 20 to 30 minutes of filming, I switch out the battery, put a fresh battery in it. So I make sure with 4 battery packs, that covers all the filming I'm going to do out there when I go out and film. And then I charge them back up when I get back, ready to go for the next video session. And so you'll notice over time how long it normally takes to charge the batteries. And then when the batteries start taking longer and longer and longer, you'll know when that battery needs to be retired and you need to get new batteries. So I am on my 3rd set of 4 batteries. After 6 years, I am on my 3rd set of 4 battery packs. So every 2 years on average is when I'm replacing those batteries, filming twice a week. So I don't think that's too bad, and the batteries are pretty inexpensive. So anyway, I've got a link in the show notes to one of my flights. Even if you're not interested in RC aircraft, click the link, go and watch the video, because I want you guys to see not a demonstration of the flight, but a demonstration of the camera. And remember that when you watch it, it doesn't look as good as the video that came directly from the camera, because I had to edit the video, and then I had to export the video. I had to render the video, and then I had to transcode the video to compress it and make it a little bit smaller. And then when I upload it to YouTube, YouTube compresses it again. So the video is already being compressed twice. And so it does lose some clarity in the video after it's been compressed not once but twice. So remember that I think it looks really, really good. But remember, when you're watching the video footage, it's not as good as the video that came directly out of the camera. But I think you'll be impressed with what a $75 action camera can produce. So take a look at the video. I think you'll be impressed with
with what a little $75 action camera can do. And the link to the camera I have in the show notes, the 8SE, is what I would be buying to replace this one if I needed to replace it. I'm hoping that camera is still available around Christmas time this year is when I would like to get it, because it does native 4K resolution, and that would be fantastic. So anyway, that's a wrap on this episode. If you got any questions, let me know, and I will see you in the next episode.